It begins long before a child understands the word for it. A glance that lasts a moment too long. A whisper that wasn't meant to be heard. A teacher's softened expectations or sharpened suspicion. A feeling that enters the body quietly, settling into places language cannot reach. Children don't analyze these moments. They absorb them. They reinterpret themselves through them. And slowly, what should have been innocence becomes vigilance. What should have been belonging becomes negotiation. Growing up with racism is not just an external experience. It becomes an internal geography, shaping how a child walks into a room, how they hold their voice, how they imagine their future. This is not a story of blame. It is the story of a nervous system learning to survive something it never should have encountered, and the lifelong echoes it leaves behind. The first recognitions are never loud. They drift into a child's life like weather. A shift in tone, a glance held too long, a joke that lands sharply without explanation. A child doesn't know the word racism, but they feel the way a room changes. They feel the tightening in a parent's jaw, the strange seriousness behind a warning, the way adults speak in coded language and assume they aren't listening. But children always listen. Maybe it begins at school. A teacher hesitating before saying their name, a classmate's joke that feels more like marking than play, or at home, in the silences heavy with history, in a sigh that carries more than the moment should hold. Sometimes it happens during play, a phrase another child repeats without understanding, a word the targeted child has never heard but instantly knows was not meant with kindness. In that moment, something shifts. A thread pulls loose from innocence. The child begins to watch more closely, to map which spaces feel warm and which feel cold. This isn't paranoia, it's adaptation. They notice when their lunch is mocked, when their hair is touched without permission, when praise comes with surprise as if capability was unexpected. Small wounds adults dismiss as misunderstandings become quiet lessons in how the world sees them. And slowly, a new awareness settles into their body. Not curiosity, but survival. Then one moment arrives, small or devastating, that confirms what they've been sensing all along. A slur spoken plainly, a store clerk following too closely, an adult treating them as older, or more dangerous than they are. This becomes a dividing line. Before, confusion. After, clarity, painful, undeniable clarity. The child realizes the discomfort was never imagined. It was recognition, an awakening to a world that assigned meaning to their skin before understanding their soul. This realization lands not with rage, but with sadness. A quiet grief for a childhood that should have been simpler, softer, unburdened by history. No one witnesses this moment. No one hears the shift, but the child feels it, a tightening in their breath, a new posture, an early understanding. The moment racism begins is not just an event, it is the end of innocence and the beginning of awareness. Racism doesn't begin with the child, it begins with the world they are born into, a world shaped long before their first breath. Every family carries history. Some of it tender, some of it wounded, some of it wrapped in silence for generations. For a child who grows up with racism, this history forms the backdrop of their identity, the soil beneath their feet. Often, the origins appear subtly. A parent watching the news with a clenched jaw, a grandparent speaking softly about the past, a family celebrating small victories loudly because victory was never guaranteed before. A child absorbs all of this long before they understand any of it. There is an unspoken curriculum in many homes, lessons passed through tone, through atmosphere, through the heaviness behind simple warnings. Be respectful. Be careful. The child learns to be composed, responsible, aware. Not because they want to, but because they must. They notice that other children get to be carefree, while they are asked to carry caution like a second skin. The roots extend beyond home. Culture speaks through media, through absence of representation, through stories where people who look like them are side characters, jokes, or threats. These messages, subtle but persistent, create a narrative of who belongs at the center and who stands at the edges. Psychologically, children absorb social hierarchies unconsciously. They notice which classmates are praised, which are doubted, whose names are mispronounced without effort to learn. They map patterns before they understand them. Sometimes the roots come from generational trauma. Stories of migration, displacement, surviving systems not built for them. The fears, the caution, the exhaustion carried by caregivers become emotional memories the child inherits. They feel it in the hand that tightens around theirs, in the silence that follows a racial incident, in the sigh that carries history. Racism becomes intergenerational, not through hatred, but through the strategies families develop to survive it. These quiet histories, unspoken fears, and inherited strengths shape the child's world long before racism is ever named. Some truths are felt before they are understood, and these truths become part of the child's foundation. Before a child understands society, their body understands danger, and the body remembers what the mind cannot yet name. Racism is not only emotional, it is neurological. The child's brain, still forming, shapes itself around the need to stay alert. In early childhood, the brain is soft clay, malleable, impressionable. And when racism enters its world, the shaping hands are not gentle. The nervous system reacts first. Children scan constantly for safety. Tones, expressions, proximity. Repeated exposure to subtle hostility teaches their brain that threat is possible even in ordinary moments. This is how hypervigilance begins, not as paranoia but as adaptation. The amygdala grows more reactive. The internal alarm becomes familiar, a quiet hum beneath daily life. Over time, vigilance stops feeling extraordinary. It becomes the baseline. Children who grow up with racism learn to read rooms with precision. Who looks uneasy? Who might judge? Who already has assumptions about them? These are lessons taught not with words, but with experience, and the brain listens. Identity is shaped neurologically too. A child forms their sense of self from the reflections offered by the world. But when those reflections are distorted, stereotyped, minimized, doubted, the brain absorbs the pattern. Not as belief, but as imprint. Even the absence of representation leaves marks. Without mirrors that affirm them, the reward pathways receive fewer signals of belonging. And belonging is not optional, it is biological. Chronic racial stress affects the prefrontal cortex as well, the region responsible for emotional regulation and trust. This can lead to heightened anxiety or the instinct to monitor every part of oneself to avoid confirming stereotypes. Another adaptation is identity fragmentation. The child learns which parts of themselves draw unwanted attention: their name, their voice, their hair, their culture. So a second self forms, one designed to blend in. This is double consciousness, seeing oneself through one's own eyes and through the eyes of a biased world. It is exhausting, but it is intelligent. It is survival. The mind adapts beautifully to protect the child, even when the cost is heavy. Because long after memories fade, the nervous system remembers, and the body's memory becomes its own kind of truth. There is the world outside a child, and then there is the world they build inside, shaped by every moment they felt seen for the wrong reasons and unseen for the right ones. By adolescence, something profound has happened. They have learned to split themselves, not by choice, but because the world required it. On the surface, they appear composed, polite, adaptable, resilient. traits adults admire without understanding the cost. Beneath that exterior lies a quiet conflict, the tension between who they are and who they must become to stay safe. This is code switching, the practiced shifting of tone, language, and expression to avoid misinterpretation or harm. To outsiders, it looks like maturity. To the child, it is survival. Their mind becomes a constant monitor. Don't sound emotional. Don't attract attention. Don't reinforce the stereotypes already waiting for you. Every interaction becomes a calculation. Speak or stay silent. Laugh along or challenge the comment. Protect yourself or protect your truth. Another burden emerges. Representation. The fear that one mistake reflects on an entire group. A weight no child should carry. Then comes self-doubt. Was I chosen because I'm capable? Or because I'm the acceptable one? Do they see me or their idea of me? This uncertainty quietly erodes self-worth. Anger turns inward because expressing it isn't safe. Sadness hides because vulnerability is misunderstood. Exhaustion becomes normal, the cost of constant vigilance. Yet within this conflict, a quiet wisdom forms. They learn to read people deeply, to sense tension others overlook, to recognize injustice even when it arrives disguised as politeness. It is insight born from necessity, not choice. The internal war is not dramatic. It unfolds in pauses, in swallowed words, in the tightening of a smile. This war doesn't disappear with age, but eventually, something interrupts it, a moment of clarity, a realization of what they've been carrying all along. And that moment becomes the beginning of understanding themselves beyond the mask. Every childhood shaped by racism eventually reaches a threshold, a moment when the unspoken becomes undeniable, when the quiet tension finally reveals its name. For some, the awakening is sharp, a slur spoken without hesitation, a teacher assuming incompetence, a stranger clutching a bag tighter, an opportunity denied without reason. For others, it arrives slowly, small cuts accumulating until they finally bleed through. When this moment comes, something inside them shifts, not new information, recognition, the realization that the heaviness they carried was not imagination. It was survival. Often this clarity arrives in adolescence, when the mind becomes sharper and the world's contradictions harder to ignore. Maybe it happens in a classroom where history is taught through a narrow lens, their lineage flattened into struggle, never brilliance or complexity, or through the media where people who look like them are feared, pitied, or reduced to headlines. Understanding arrives like gravity. This is bigger than me. This existed long before I was born. The awareness brings grief for themselves, for generations before them, for the childhood that now feels altered by truth. Anger follows, not explosive, but deep, ancient, woven into the bones. Yet clarity also brings relief. It explains the vigilance, the mask, the exhaustion. It names what was lived. Naming it becomes a turning point. A fog lifts. They begin to see the architecture of racism, the patterns, the expectations, the stereotypes. And with that comes a gentle question. If this was never about me, then who am I outside of it? Sometimes the turning point comes through connection, meeting others who say, I felt that too. Other times it comes through knowledge, learning history, art, and brilliance that rewrite the narratives they were given. Either way, something opens. Not healing yet, but self-awareness, a first breath after years of holding it in. Healing does not arrive as a single moment. It comes quietly, like a soft loosening in the chest or the first breath that doesn't feel monitored. After awakening, there is disorientation. They stand between two worlds, the one that shaped them and the one they are just beginning to imagine. Reclaiming the self begins slowly. At first it looks like questioning. Why did I believe I had to shrink? Why did I carry burdens that were never mine? Then comes the grief, mourning years spent fitting into roles designed for safety, not authenticity. But healing begins where clarity settles, where the shame they once carried reveals itself as inherited, not earned. One of the first internal shifts is the softening of the inner voice, from be careful to be true. The mask that once protected them begins to loosen, not because the world has changed, but because self-abandonment becomes too heavy. Reclaiming the self requires unlearning the need to earn belonging, the instinct to overperform, the belief that excellence is protection. The body resists at first. The nervous system, shaped by years of vigilance, flinches at rest, questions praise, mistakes softness for danger. Still, something shifts. Connection helps. Being surrounded by people who carry similar stories makes the mask unnecessary. In their presence, the self feels mirrored instead of mistaken. Knowledge helps too. Learning history, brilliance, and ancestry that counter every stereotype they were raised around. Language becomes medicine. Terms like microaggressions and racial trauma give shape to what once felt unexplainable. One of the most profound forms of healing is the rediscovery of joy. Joy that is unmonitored, unapologetic, unshrinking. For someone raised with racism, joy is not small. It is reclamation. Healing is not linear. Old fears return. Old triggers surface. But now they meet them with understanding, not self-blame. Integration is when the older self reaches back to hold the younger one, saying, "You survived for both of us. Now let me carry what you no longer need too." Reclaiming the self is not becoming someone new. It is rediscovering who they were before the world taught them to fear themselves. A gentle homecoming, a quiet unfolding, the beginning of freedom. Some stories do not end. They simply soften. They learn to breathe in quieter ways. Growing up with racism does not disappear with age. It becomes an echo, a room inside them they visit less often but never forget how to find. Healing is not erasure. It is the gentle rearranging of meaning. It is learning to carry the past with open palms instead of clenched fists. With time, the moments that once defined them begin to blur at the edges. The sting becomes a scar, still visible, still tender, but no longer bleeding. This closing is not about forced forgiveness or pretending the world is kinder than it is. It is about realizing they no longer need armor to walk through their own life. There is a moment, sometimes barely noticeable, when they step into a room without shrinking, when they speak their name without hesitation, when rest no longer feels dangerous. The world may not have changed, but their relationship with it has. They begin to see themselves not through the lens of caution, but through the lens of truth, a truth rooted in humanity, ancestry, complexity, and dignity. The child who once carried every whisper, every glance, every subtle wound is still inside them, but no longer alone. They are held now by an older, steadier self who knows survival and now chooses freedom. Some days, the past returns. A comment, a memory, a familiar heaviness, but it no longer unravels them. It arrives, is felt, and passes through. This is the quiet revolution of healing. Not forgetting, but transforming the relationship with what was once unbearable. Strength no longer means perfection or silence. Strength becomes softness. Strength becomes honesty. Strength becomes existing without apology. Because the child they once were deserved tenderness, deserved safety, deserved to grow without carrying history. And the adult they became can finally give them what the world withheld. In the end, healing is not an ending. It is a way of standing, a way of breathing, a way of living more whole than they ever believed possible. A life not written by pain, but informed by truth and held with gentle hands.